It is that time of the year again. Fantasy Football 2017. So how this is going to work is I'm going to provide my basic tips for being successful in your fantasy league this year. Honestly, this could work for all future years. This could be the last fantasy advice live stream I do for preseason. So we're going to do tips as well. We're also going to talk about successful ways you could draft accordingly in your fantasy league, whether you do a standard league or a PPR league, snake draft or an auction draft. It honestly doesn't matter, because I'm going to provide advice for both of those things. So let's just sit back for a while and listen to some great advice. Now, the first tip I have for you, being successful in your league. Know who your opponents are and who their favorite team is. What that could do is it could be a big key factor for you in determining what kind of players we take in the early rounds. Like, for example, a Cowboys fan might take Ezekiel Elliot with the first overall pick. A Steelers fan might take Le'Veon Bell with the first overall pick. A Patriots fan could take Gronk in the first round. A Patriots fan could also take Tom Brady in the second or third round. A Packers fan could take Aaron Rodgers in the first round. So if you can study those opponents, you can study them like that. It could really be a huge factor. It will affect your league if you know who your opponents, who their favorite teams are, and who their favorite players are. Because they could really want those players in their team. And they'll be willing to trade you almost anything just to get that particular player. Like for a Falcons fan, they might want Julio Jones. And yes, the 28-3 lead. It's starting to get old and starting to get on my nerves. But step one kind of leads into step two, or tip two. Choose the game over your fandom. And what I mean by choosing the game over your fandom. Choosing the game over your fandom is going to be a huge success point in your fantasy league, no matter what you do. Because if you choose the game over your fandom, you're not going in there with a plan to just take all your favorite players or players from your favorite team. Because people that choose their fandom over the fantasy league, those are the people that lose the league really badly. Those are the players that don't even make the playoffs in your league. Those people never win. At least 98% of those people do not win the fantasy league. So don't draft your favorite players if it doesn't make sense. Like, here's examples of what doesn't make sense. Drafting Tom Brady round 1, no sense. Drafting Aaron Rodgers round 1, doesn't make any sense. Taking Ezekiel Elliot in the first round if you're a Cowboys fan, it does make sense because why? He's going to be a first round pick anyway, whether he gets suspended or not. In fact, he'll probably be top 3 in 98% of fantasy leagues. I'm going to say 100% of snake drafts, he'll be at least a top 5 pick at the worst. In auction drafts, maybe not a top 3 thing because auction drafts, they kind of work really goofy, but we're going to talk about that later. So choose the game over your fandom. Don't be that guy that just takes their favorite players. It just ruins the fun for the opponents. It ruins suspense. Like, don't expose like your real team name without completing the draft first. And then people have a feeling on who you're going to draft, and it's going to be no fun. Alright, basic tip number 3. Do not propose or accept trades after your draft. It's going to make your opponents think you're going to be really weak. It's going to think that you're going to be really desperate, and they're really confident that they're going to feel like they're not going to make any trades with you because they think you're going to be so desperate and you think your team is going to be so bad, they don't want to trade anybody with you. Wait until probably, I would say at least after week 2 to start proposing serious trades. Because if you wait till week 2, it'll get a good idea. There's a couple games into the season. We kind of know who's going to be on the rise for fantasy stats and who's kind of going down a little bit, who's deteriorating. So don't propose or accept trades after your draft. Basic number 4, do not draft a QB in round 1 or 2. That's the biggest mistake anybody in fantasy football can make, is drafting a quarterback way too early. In fact, there are so many other positions that are more important than a quarterback right away. When you want to draft a quarterback, I would say make sure you at least have 2 solid running backs and 2 solid wide receivers before you even think about drafting a quarterback. Which will kind of lead into number 5. Running backs and wide receivers are at a premium. What that means is there are not too many running backs and wide receivers that'll put up consistency, fantasy value, week in and week out. Like, for example, you'd want to probably take a running back or wide receiver in the first round, depending on what kind of league you're in, which I will explain that later, because it's going to make sense. Tip number 6, kickers are meant to be drafted in the last round. If you draft a kicker before the last round, it's basically a waste of a pick. That's why I just lose respect in like mock drafts that I see people doing, and they just draft a kicker like way too early. Like, nobody takes mock drafts seriously. That's why I never even do them. That's why I never bother with them. Because nobody ever takes them seriously. So if you take a kicker way too early in your fantasy league, it's a waste of a pick, and it kills a lot of your momentum heading into fantasy season. Just like drafting a quarterback in round 1 or 2. It kills momentum. Tip number 7. Don't draft a defense too early, but don't draft a defense too late either. And here's what I mean by that. Defenses are not the thing to go for really early in the draft. I would say maybe it depends on what defense you get. In my opinion, you have to be the first or second person to strike on defense. Because as soon as one person targets a defense, I see this a lot in fantasy leagues that I'm in. It starts a trigger point for everybody to start taking a defense. Everybody goes into panic mode. So maybe in 6th round, you're thinking the Seattle defense. The next one you know, the following defenses are gone. Kansas City, Denver, Houston. I think Atlanta's defense is going to be taken pretty early this year in quite a bit of fantasy drafts. Because if you wait too late to get a defense, you're going to be stuck with a defense that's not going to put up consistent, valuable points every single week. But if you draft a defense too early, it'll also be a waste of a pick. Like, if you take Seattle's defense in the 2nd round, that's a waste of a pick. Because there's going to be so many running backs and wide receivers that will need to be taken before a defense does. Basic tip number 8. Always pay attention to the waiver wire each and every single week. You can't win your fantasy league just with the draft night itself. You can only lose it on draft night. The people that win their fantasy leagues, those are the ones that are dedicated, that pay attention to the waiver wire each and every week. I mean, last year we saw so many valuable people come out of fantasy with all these great points that were on the waiver wire. Like, the perfect example for this, Tyreek Hill. He came off the waiver wire. Because if you don't pay attention to the waiver wire, you might need somebody off that waiver wire list when one of your star players are on their bye week. And bye weeks are very, very crucial in paying attention when those bye weeks are for those players. Because you honestly got to plan ahead in those drafts. Like, you can't take 2 running backs with the same bye week. It wouldn't make sense. Like, don't take 2 wide receivers that have the same bye week. It wouldn't make sense either. So the waiver wire is going to be really important, because those could be players you need when your star players are on a bye week. Basic number 9. Go into your draft with some sort of mindset on who you want to target on your team. Like, here's some good ideas. I would say draft a running back in rounds 1 and 2 because they're at a premium. The wide receivers are more deep than the running backs are. The running backs are the least deep position in fantasy football. So I would say in order to win your league, to give yourself the best chance of winning your fantasy league, it's to draft a running back in rounds 1 and 2. You could also go wide receiver in the first or second round, but to give you the best chance, you have to take a running back in round 1 and 2 because they're at a premium. Number 10, don't be afraid to make a bold move or two in your fantasy draft, but don't make the moves that are out of the ordinary. Like, here's some moves that are out of the ordinary. Drafting Aaron Rodgers in round 3, and then drafting Tom Brady round 4. That's out of the ordinary. Unless you think you're able to get something in exchange for trading one of those two quarterbacks. A bold move in fantasy would probably be taking Antonio Brown in the first round, and then probably going right back and taking somebody like Dez Bryant or A.J. Green in round 2. That could be a bold move because those two wide receivers, that's a group of wide receivers who can put up consistent points each and every week. But don't do anything that's really out of the ordinary. Like, out of the ordinary is taking a defense in round 2 or 3. Out of the ordinary is taking Gronk with the first overall pick because Gronkowski is injury prone. Basic tip number 11. Avoid drafting so many rookies because you don't really know how many of these rookies are actually going to get significant fantasy points week in and week out. Like, rookies that I would target, the number one rookie target for fantasy football this year is going to be hands down Leonard Fournette. It's going to be no contest. And plus, the rookies are either going to be hit and miss. Either going to be really getting you those big points, or they're just going to be complete flops. Because rookies are the biggest hit and misses in your fantasy league each and every single year. Basic tip number 11. Basic number 12. Don't be immediate to give up if you lose in week 1. Fantasy football is a marathon, not a sprint. ESPN Fantasy Football, NFL.com Fantasy Football, Yahoo Sports Fantasy Football, whatever. Those aren't DraftKings. You got to stick with it each and every week. Just because you lose in week 1, doesn't mean you can't easily win the next 3 or 4 weeks in a row and be right back in your league. Or if you start 1 and 3, don't give up at that point because you can easily win the next 4 or 5 and be right back in contention. Because sometimes in fantasy football, you just have to play for 4th place to get into the playoffs. Of course, depending on what kind of league you're in. If you're in a league that does 18 playoffs, honestly, it just depends on your league. You just got to play for a playoff spot at that point. Because once you reach the playoff point in fantasy football, anything goes. And number 13. Now this is going to be the biggest piece of advice I am going to be giving you all evening. Be committed to your fantasy league all season. It really grinds my gears when people just participate in their league draft and just don't even pay attention to it all season. It gets annoying. It just ruins a spot in the fantasy league. So don't be that guy that just drafts the team and just doesn't do anything with it all season. It irritates your league members. You're not being a valuable league member. You're not being dedicated enough. Like I'm saying, the people that win are going to be really dedicated to the league. So now let's talk about how to draft accordingly in your fantasy leagues. Now, it honestly depends on what kind of league you end up with. First, we're going to talk about the auction league because those rules are set really very goofy. Like if you're in one of those rare auction leagues, that's a league where you just select a player and put it up for bid. And I'm not sure, I believe it's $200 that they have that you can bid on, but the max you can bid is probably, I think it's 100 and something for one player. But tips to succeed in your auction league. I would say, if you want to be successful in an auction league, take somebody with your first overall choice of selection. Make it be like a third or fourth round guy. Because there's going to be a chance that people may try running out of their money. And you could easily bid on like an Antonio Brown, probably get him like much cheaper. Like if you're lucky enough to have a first overall pick in an auction league, don't select someone up for auction that's going to be a first round pick because people will be willing to spend all their money. Like for example, if you're really confident what quarterback you want, bid somebody like Aaron Rodgers for a first round pick in an auction league because people might be willing to throw their money right towards Aaron Rodgers. Same thing with like Tom Brady. Because that's a big piece of... Because you can get lots of steals in an auction draft. Because as goofy as an auction league is, I wouldn't mind doing an auction league. Because it just seems like a fun thing to do. It really challenges your mind. It really makes you think more than in my opinion, than a snake draft. Now let's talk about the snake drafts. Now could be different points where you run your league. You could be either a standard league or a PPR league. And for those of you that don't know, PPR stands for point per reception. So I would say if you're in a PPR league, point per reception league, take a wide receiver in either rounds 1 or 2. Because in a PPR league, your wide receivers get 1 point just for catching a pass. Same thing for running backs too. Like if you have a first overall pick in a PPR league, go with David Johnson. Because David Johnson put up consistent PPR league numbers. You can also probably go with Ezekiel Elliot. In a PPR league, here's what I would say. I would say go with the wide receiver or running back in the first round. And then do the opposite of what you're doing in round 2. And then in round 2. But in PPR, you want to kind of stack up your running backs, wide receivers, and tight ends as soon as possible. In fact, you probably want to stack up your running backs, wide receivers, and tight ends as soon as possible, no matter what kind of fantasy league you do. Because those are the ones that will get you all the points. And here's something I also forgot to mention. This is associated with a quarterback in fantasy football. I would suggest go for a quarterback like Marcus Mariota, Russell Wilson, Dak Prescott, Andrew Luck, Aaron Rodgers. And here's a big reason why. Because those are quarterbacks that will probably, in all likelihood, get a couple of rushing touchdowns here and there. And a rushing touchdown is worth 6 points. And that would be huge. It could be a difference between winning and losing a fantasy league, depending on what kind of week it is. So consider taking one of those types of quarterbacks in your fantasy league. And let's also not forget Cam Newton. Cam Newton will put up big numbers in fantasy this year. Because he could score rushing touchdowns as well as all of those guys. So consider taking a quarterback that could also have rushing touchdowns. Let's see, what else can I offer? Honestly, here's what I'm going to write down. I'm going to do a suggested order on who to draft in your fantasy leagues. Let's start off with standard. For rounds 1 and 2, I would suggest going running back for round 1 and 2. And then for 3 and 4, go wide receiver for both of those. Round 5, I would suggest you can go for either another running back or either another wide receiver. Round 6, you could go with one of the tight ends if they're going to be available by then, whether if it's Jordan Reed or whether if it's going to be Greg Olsen or Jimmy Graham. So for round 6, I would suggest another running back, wide receiver, or a tight end. I would say round 7, make sure you at least have a tight end at that point. Now, you don't have to follow the order I'm going with this, but at least kind of sets you in the right mindset. And then for round 8, that's where you would either want to go with a QB or a defense. Because I guarantee you by round 8, somebody's going to start considering going with defense. And then round 9, I would say consider going for another wide. I would say go wide receiver round 9. Because there are going to be a couple wide receivers that have great depth, that are 9th round picks that could develop some good fantasy talent. Then I'd say round 10 and round 11. Go with either a running back or a defense. And yes, I do realize that at this point, it would be a possibility of having 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 running backs in your team at this point. But you don't have to take running backs for all of those. In fact, after about round 8 or 9, you can honestly just start taking like whatever kind of position you want. But if you want to take a second quarterback in your fantasy league, there's nothing wrong with that. I do that a lot too. Because you honestly never know who could get hurt in preseason. You don't know who could have to miss a game. I would consider taking another quarterback at either round 12 or round 13. Round 14, you basically do whatever you want at that point. You either go with you can go either another running back, wide receiver, defense, or special teams. You can go with whoever. In fact, I'm going to cross that out. Round 14 is going to be whatever you want. And then round 15, that's your kicker. So I'm going to show this. I know it's on a pink index card. So that is kind of the idea of what you want for a standard league. Now let's do PPR. I'll put it on a white index card this time, so it'll probably be able to see it easier. Now again, PPR is point per reception. So for round 1, either a running back or a wide receiver. Round 2, opposite of what you did round 1. What I mean by that is, if you took a running back in round 1 in a PPR league, taking a wide receiver in round 2 is almost a must thing, because once again, you're going to get a point just for someone making a wide receiver making a catch. I would say round 3, running back or wide receiver again. And then round 4, opposite of round 3. So if you're catching my drift so far, at this point in a PPR league, you should have 2 running backs and 2 wide receivers at this point. And then round 5, I would say get your tight end in round 5, because there will probably be tight ends available that are like Jordan Reed, Jimmy Graham, Greg Olsen, that'll be available that will catch passes consistently. Let's not also forget Travis Kelce as well for Kansas City. And then for round 6, take another running back or wide receiver. And then round 7, opposite of round 6. See, because this is getting easier so far. In fact, I'm going to show it to you right now. See, at this point, it's getting much easier. It's less stressful to follow it that way. Because that way you got a little bit of a pattern going on. Because in a PPR league, you don't need to take quarterbacks right away. In fact, you can wait till almost the very end to get a solid quarterback out of the deal. In round 8, I would suggest taking a second tight end. Because tight ends will be at a premium in fantasy football. Tight ends are the second most. Let me say that again. Tight ends are the second most valuable players on a fantasy team than behind a running back. Then round 9. Round 9, you can finally do your quarterback at round 9 because you don't want to maybe necessarily do quarterbacks too late. I would say at around round 9, that'd be a good place to start considering quarterbacks. And then round 10, I would recommend a defense by round 10. Because if you wait too late for defense like we talked about earlier, you're going to get screwed into having like a defense that you don't really want to really have on your team. Then I would say for round 11, take a second defense. Especially if you're the first one to crack on the defense if you have to be the first one to crack on the defense in your PPR leagues. Because like I said, when one person takes a defense, it just triggers a load of panic and everybody else to take a defense. Then for round 12, 13, 14, it's whatever you want again for rounds 12 through 14. And then round 15, that is your kicker, and that'll be the end of your PPR draft. So here's the complete diagram for a PPR league. So, I appreciate everybody that has watched this fantasy advice. It really means a lot to me. Share this video with your friends and your family. But before we end it, I'm going to take some questions from the live stream commenters, because we have a couple of them. Jenkins 31, how many in our league? I'm not sure you're referring to, Jenkins. If you want to join a league with me, I've got signups going along. So far we've got 15 that say they will do it, but things could probably change from here on then. Smil Garla, do not take a QB in the first round, 7 through 10 rounds. Yes, that's kind of how I diagrammed it for both of them. Especially in a standard league, I would put round 8 for round 7 or 8 for a standard. And then maybe round 9 for a PPR. Because PPRs, you got to fill out your running backs and wide receivers and tight ends before you can focus on the quarterbacks and the team defenses. Because that's going to be really important. No matter what kind of league you're in, you always got to fill out your running backs and wide receivers first. And Sinu Garla asked, do you have a league? If you can I join? Yes, kind of what I was saying. The sign-ups, just put your email like in the comment section of my fantasy football signups video, and I'll get you on the list for signups. I'm going to send the invite soon. I'm going to probably wait till we can kind of settle down how many leagues I probably need to open up. Gio knows says Minnesota's defense will go very high. In fact, if I still have my fantasy football rankings from about a month or two ago, so I believe I still have them. I believe I had Minnesota's defense pretty up there, but not quite up there. I had Minnesota's defense at 6. In fact, my top 10 defenses went Kansas City, Seattle, Denver, Houston, New England, Minnesota, Atlanta, Arizona, New York Giants, and Carolina. Let's see, what else do we got? Gio Knows also says, Dalvin Cook will crush this year's rookie. Look for him late. Kind of what I said about taking rookies, or taking so many rookies, because they can either be hit and miss. Which I don't focus on too many rookies. I'm very cautious about how they're going to really do. Whether they're going to get a lot of playing time or not. So that's a big concern I have with rookies. But if Dalvin Cook is certainly available, probably round 8 or 9 in a PPR league, of course I'm going to draft him at that point. Wow, so Nick asked, Russell Wilson or Andrew Luck this year? Kind of what I said either one would do, considering those are quarterbacks that always have occasional rushing touchdowns. But I would feel like if you're looking for a quarterback that could also get you the rushing touchdowns, go with Russell Wilson, because I guarantee he'll get about at least 5 rushing touchdowns this year. Andrew Luck will probably get a couple, but maybe not have as much of effect as in the running game than Russell Wilson will. I would say either of those quarterbacks will work, but I would probably go with Russell Wilson, because I think he might have a better offensive line this year than Andrew Luck will. So you got to pay attention when you're drafting all of your fantasy league players. You got to look at how good their offensive lines are. I know Seattle's and Indianapolis defenses are not necessarily the best. Or offensive lines aren't necessarily the best. But I think Seattle's offensive line will be a little bit better this year than Indianapolis's. Whatever to watch, as I like these tips. I'm not too big on fantasy football, but it is interesting. I may start this year or next year. You got to start this year, man. You can even play in a league with me. I'll get you signed up as long as you put your email, so I know who to send the invite to and where to send it to. So I'll definitely welcome you into a league. Dylan Flores asked, kind of off topic, but I'm a huge Cowboys fan, and he thinks we need to get Ezekiel Elliot, the guy that keeps me out of trouble off the field. How do you feel? Honestly, with the whole incidents that he's been into, I don't think it's necessarily the problem. Like, with the domestic violence incident, there was 4 witnesses that came out and said that this never happened. And with the bar fight, there was witnesses that said the person that threw the punch wasn't Ezekiel Elliot. So Ezekiel Elliott's not the problem. Like, I don't think they really need, security to be around him, or they need to get him a guy that stays out of trouble. I just think Zeke just needs to focus on this season, since it's now 50 days away. Just focus on training camp, focus on the preseason, focus on the season. So I don't think Zeke is really a problem, but sadly, even the Cowboys and Zeke himself have accepted the fact that he might get a small suspension, probably a 2 or 3 game suspension. Anything more than 4 will be ridiculous. So yes, DG Productions. What's up, Johnny? If you want a good sleeper defense, try Falcons or Jaguars. The thing with the Jaguars defense, the fact that they're kind of inconsistent, like the Jaguars are a team. They're the unpredictable team of the NFL right now. Like 1 minute people think that they're going to be a team on the rise. The other, then at the end of the season, they're 3-13. That's why I'm not really focused on the Jaguars' defense in fantasy. But I wouldn't say the Falcons' defense is much of a sleeper because we saw that defense all throughout the playoffs, and it got better and better as long as the season went. So the Falcons' defense isn't a sleeper to me. I feel like they're going to be taken really high in a lot of fantasy drafts. Because they just added Takaris McKinley to pair up with Vic Beasley. Whatever to watch is my biggest sleeper team in the NFL this year is the Eagles. Who is your big sleeper? Well, the Eagles is one of my sleeper teams, to admit. The other sleeper I have is the Tennessee Titans. They were so close playing the playoffs last year. Things are starting to come together in Tennessee a little bit. So my sleeper team is the Tennessee Titans. DG Productions, well, if you were well informed, they aren't, but on ESPN they are ranked low. Also, that's another tip I have. This is like a bonus tip. Don't believe in the rankings that ESPN has. Like, don't just take the best player available in your snake drafts or in any draft you have. Because rankings are just rankings. You just got to go with how you feel at that moment. You just got to go with your gut in fantasy football. Anyway, it's almost time to wrap it up. I'm going to give it about 45 seconds for any last-minute questions that I will answer. But if not, I'm going to sign off. So I'll give it about another 30 seconds for any last-second questions. DG Productions, I don't believe their rankings at all. I take the guy that I want or need. That's what you have to do. Like, just because Antonio Brown was the number one overall player in fantasy last year doesn't mean I was going to take him in the first overall pick. Unless I was in a PPR league. If I had the number one overall pick last year in a standard league, I would still go with running back first. Because that's really important. Like I said, running back's the most important thing in fantasy football. And no matter what league you do, wide receivers are as equally as important in a PPR league. But you got to take a running back first. It's been that way for years now. Whatever to watch. Who is your rookie of the year? I think there's a couple of rookies out there that could really be out there. Defensive rookie of the year, I'm going with Takaris McKinley. Because he'll pair up with Vic Beasley, and I feel like McKinley will get at least 7 or 8 sacks this year. I just got a feeling. And by the way, when you take defense in fantasy football, you get a point for a sack. Offensive Rookie of the Year, I would probably go with Leonard Fournette. I think that's probably the safest bet for fantasy to go with Leonard Fournette because he will put up Rookie of the Year numbers. So there you have it. My Offensive Rookie of the Year, Leonard Fournette. Defensive Rookie of the Year, Takaris McKinley. Anyway, that is all I have for you today. Thank you for everybody that tuned in the live stream. Thank you for everyone that's going to be watching it later. Good luck in your fantasy leagues. And good luck to everyone that will be playing me in fantasy football. It's going to be a fun fantasy season. I will see you next time. Like, subscribe, share this video with your friends and family. Have a great night, everybody.